Every week, 3 guests check in. Every week, only their luggage checks out. Management says it's normal turnover, but after last night, I know what's really taking them, and it isn't human. The Line Motel appeared in my headlights like a mirage, which should have been my first warning. I've been driving for 16 hours straight, following the skeletal remains of Highway 67 through West Texas, when my truck finally gave up outside El Paso. The engine seized with a sound like grinding teeth, and I found myself stranded in a landscape so flat and empty it felt like the earth had given up halfway through creation. I called the only number on the rusted payphone at the abandoned gas station where I'd coasted to a stop. A woman's voice, smooth as river stones, told me there was work available. Night shift at a motel. Cash paid weekly. Room included. She didn't ask about my qualifications or my past, which told me everything I needed to know about the kind of place that would hire me. The motel sat exactly on the border, straddling the line between Texas and Mexico, like it couldn't decide which country to haunt. It was a single-story L-shaped building, 12 rooms total, painted a sun-bleached pink that might have been cheerful once. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting red light across the cracked parking lot. The Line Motel, it read, though sometimes when the sign stuttered, I could swear it said the Line Motel instead. Miss Callahan met me in the office at dusk. She was tall and thin, with silver hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. Her smile showed too many teeth, and her handshake lasted a moment too long. Her fingers cold despite the oppressive heat that radiated from the desert floor, even after sunset. "Welcome to the Line Motel," she said, gesturing to the cramped office behind the front desk. "You'll work 7 to 7, midnight to noon. Simple work. Check guests in, follow the rules, don't ask questions." She slid a spiral-bound notebook across the counter. The cover was stained with something that looked like rust. "This is your manual. Read it tonight. Memorize it. The rules aren't suggestions." I flipped through the pages. What I found made my stomach tighten. These weren't normal hotel policies. Never let anyone check in after midnight. Never rent room 3 and room 8 on the same night. Always refill room SIXS coffee pod, even if no one checked in there. The list went on, each rule stranger than the last. What happens if I break one? I asked. Miss Callahan's smile widened. "Don't worry if guests don't check out," she said, ignoring my question entirely. "The desert keeps what it wants." Then she left, her footsteps echoing long after she disappeared into the dark. My first night started quietly. I sat behind the desk, the ancient air conditioner rattling like dice in a cup, studying the rulebook and trying to make sense of it all. The office smelled like bleach and copper, and a fly buzzed persistently against the window, even though I couldn't see how it had gotten in. The cameras mounted in the corners had lenses so clouded with dust they looked like cataracts. At 9:15, my first guest arrived. A trucker, broad-shouldered and sunburned, driving an 18-wheeler with out-of-state plates. He barely spoke as I checked him in, just grunted and took the key to room 4. I logged his name, Thomas Garrett, in the guest registry, noting the time and room number as instructed. At 10:40, a young couple pulled up in a Honda with California plates, their faces tight with the kind of argument that's been going on for miles. The woman wouldn't meet my eyes as I handed them the key to room 7. I logged them as Jennifer and Michael Reyes. At 11:53, 7 minutes before midnight, a traveling salesman in a wrinkled suit rushed in, sweating and desperate. "Please," he gasped. "I've been driving for hours. I can't go any further tonight." I glanced at the clock. Rule 2. Never let anyone check in after midnight. I slid the registry toward him with shaking hands. "Sign quick," I said. He scribbled his name, David Marsh, and I gave him room 11, watching the clock tick over to 11:58 as he stumbled out. Then the motel went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I try to distract myself by organizing the key rack, making sure each brass key hung on its proper hook. That's when I noticed something odd. Beneath each key was a small white tag, and on each tag was a number. Not the room number, a different number. Sequential. The key for room 4, where Thomas the trucker was staying, had the number 247. Room 7 had 248 and 249. Room 11 had 250. I was trying to puzzle this out when I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, barefoot slapping against hot concrete, back and forth in front of the office window, pacing like a caged animal. I looked at the security monitor, the grainy black and white feed showing the parking lot and the row of room doors. Nothing. The concrete was empty, but I could still hear the footsteps, clearer now, accompanied by a wet, dragging sound that made my skin crawl. At 2:45 a.m. exactly, the desk bell rang. Twice. Sharp and clear. I jerked upright. I'd been dozing, my head full of dreams about sand and screaming, and my hand reached automatically for the bell. Rule 10. At exactly 2:45 a.m., the bell will ring twice. Don't look up. I froze, my eyes locked on the scuffed wood of the desk. I could feel something in the room with me, a presence that made the air thick and hard to breathe. The temperature dropped, so suddenly I could see my breath. I counted as 60, then 70, then 100, my eyes burning for not blinking before whatever was left. The air conditioner coughed back to life, and warmth seeped back into the room. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. At dawn, I walked the property as instructed, saying goodbye to each room, even though I heard no sound from within. At room 4, I knocked softly. "Have a safe journey," I said to the closed door. Silence answered. At room 7, the same. At room 11, I just raised my hand to knock when I heard the sound of running water inside, and then footsteps approaching the door. I stepped back, my heart hammering. The doorknob turned, but the door never opened. Instead, the footsteps retreated, and the water shut off, and everything went silent again. By 7 a.m., when Ms. Callahan arrived to relieve me, all 3 vehicles were gone from the parking lot. But their luggage, a worn duffel bag, 2 matching suitcases, and a leather briefcase, sat in a neat row beside the office door. A white van with "management only" printed on the side idled at the far end of the lot. As I watched, a figure in coveralls loaded the luggage into the back and drove off toward the desert, disappearing into the heat shimmer on the horizon. "Good first night?" Miss Callahan asked, not really asking at all. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She handed me a key to room 1, my room, and I stumbled toward it, my legs weak with exhaustion. I just reached the door when I heard my phone ring. The desk phone back in the office. I could see Miss Callahan through the window, sitting at the desk, but she made no move to answer it. It rang 7 times before stopping. Then my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. Unknown number. Against every instinct, I answered. The voice on the other end was rough and tired, speaking barely above a whisper. But I recognized it. Thomas Garrett, the trucker from room 4. "You forgot to log me out," he said. Then the line went dead, and when I looked toward the desert, I saw tire tracks leading away for where his truck had been parked. But they only went about 50 feet before stopping abruptly, as if the vehicle had simply lifted into the air and disappeared. I stood there in the growing heat, watching dust devils spin across the empty highway, and realized that Miss Callahan had been right about one thing. The desert keeps what it wants, and I was starting to understand that I might be next. I started keeping my own records after the first week. The official guest registry that Miss Callahan checked each morning was becoming a problem. Names kept disappearing from it. Not crossed out or erased, but faded, like they'd been written in invisible ink that was finally giving up. By the time Ms. Callahan arrived for her morning inspection, the previous night's entries would be barely visible, and by noon, they'd be gone entirely. But the numbers under the keys kept climbing. 247, 250, 253, 256. 3 more every week, like clockwork. I bought a small black notebook from the gas station 12 miles down the highway. The same place where my truck sat rusting in the sun, beyond repair. I kept it hidden in my room, logging every guest who checked in. Their names, their license plates, the time they arrived, what they were wearing, anything that proved they'd existed. Because after they left their luggage by the office door and vanished into the desert morning, there was nothing else to confirm they'd been real at all. On my 8th night, I broke a rule. I couldn't help it. A woman checked in at 10:30 p.m., alone, driving a rental car with Nevada plates. She was in her 40s, with tired eyes and a suitcase that looked expensive. She signed to register as Patricia Owens and took the key to room 9 without comment. But as she turned to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. She had no luggage tag on her suitcase. No identification tag at all. Rule 3. If a guest arrives without luggage, give them room 9. They won't leave anyway. I'd given her room 9. I hadn't even thought about it. My hand had moved automatically to that key. How had I known? At 3:17 a.m., I heard her door open. I checked the monitor. The grainy feed showed her walking toward her car, but something was wrong with the image. She flickered, her outline unstable, like I was watching her through heat waves. She reached her car, opened the trunk, and stood there for a long moment, staring inside. Then she closed it, walked back to her room, and I never saw her leave again. At dawn, her rental car was gone, but her suitcase sat with the others by the office door. When I checked the trunk space where her car had been parked, I found only a perfect rectangle of clean concrete, as if the desert dust had never touched it. But more disturbing were the tire marks leading away. They started normal enough, but after about 20 feet, they began to fade, becoming shallow, then just faint impressions, then nothing at all. The tracks simply stopped existing, right in the middle of the parking lot. Stop keeping duplicates. Miss Callahan told me that morning, her cold eyes fixed on me. She found my notebook while I was in the bathroom. It sat on the desk between us, and I could see she'd been reading it. The official registry is sufficient. We don't need your amateur record-keeping, confusing things. Where do they go? I asked, my voice hoarse from a night without sleep. The guests. Their cars. Where does the van take their luggage? Her smile was patient, like I was a child asking why the sky was blue. They check out. They go home. Where else would they go? But they don't. Mind the ice machine, she interrupted, pointing. It's running by itself again. That means the rooms are full. I turned to look. The ice machine in the breezeway between rooms 5 and 6 was humming loudly, its motor grinding, even though I could see through its plastic front that it was empty. Rule 9. If the ice machine runs by itself, unplug it. That means the rooms are full. But I'd only checked in 2 guests last night. Patricia Owens and a truck driver named James Lau who'd taken room 12. 2 guests. 10 empty rooms. How are the rooms full? I unplugged the ice machine as instructed. It went silent. But as I walked back to the office, I swear I heard it laugh, a low mechanical sound that raised every hair on my neck. That night, the pattern broke. No one checked in. For the first time since I'd started working at the Line Motel, the parking lot remained empty from sunset to sunrise. I sat at the desk, watching the highway, waiting for headlights that never came. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sounds of the motel itself, the creak of settling wood, the whisper of sand against glass, the occasional groan of pipes in the walls. At midnight, room SIXS coffee pot started brewing. I could hear it from the office, the gurgle and hiss of water heating, the smell of coffee drifting through the night air. Rule 16. Always refill room SIXS coffee pot, even if no one checked in there. I'd refilled it at sunset, like always. There was no one in room 6. There hadn't been anyone in room 6 for 3 days. But the coffee was brewing anyway. And when I went to check, I found the pot half empty, as if someone had poured themselves a cup. Steam still rose from the dark liquid. On the bathroom counter, a single towel was damp. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding. As I pulled the door closed, I heard water running in the shower. I ran back to the office and locked myself inside, watching room 6 on the security monitor. The door remained closed. No one entered or left. But through the window, I could see shadows moving inside, backlit by the bathroom light, and I realized with growing horror that some of the guests never actually left at all. They just stopped being visible. The next week brought a new revelation. A couple checked in on Tuesday, young, maybe early 20s, holding hands and laughing about some private joke. I put them in room 5 because room 4 was occupied, though I couldn't say by who or what. They signed in as Alex and Jordan Price. Rule 17. Never let 2 guests stay in room 5 at once. I'd broken it. I hadn't meant to, but I'd given a room to 2 people and the rule clearly stated 1 guest per room 5. I almost called them back, almost told them there was a mistake, but they'd already disappeared around the corner toward their room. The moment their door closed, the lights in the parking lot began to flicker, on and off, in a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. At 1:33 a.m., I heard screaming, not from room 5, from underneath it. The sound came from below the foundation, as if someone was buried beneath the concrete, clawing their way up. I grabbed the rule book, my hand shaking, and found a note I hadn't seen before, written in the margin beside Rule 17. 2 enter. Only echoes leave. The screaming stopped at 2:45 a.m., exactly when the desk bell rang its 2 sharp notes. I kept my eyes down as instructed, but I could hear something moving through the office, footsteps that squelched wetly, and a sound like breathing through water. It circled the desk once, twice, 3 times, then left through the door, even though I never heard it open. At dawn, I found only 1 suitcase by the office door, 1 car in the parking lot, and when I knocked on room 5 to say goodbye, only 1 voice answered, though I couldn't tell if it was Alex or Jordan. The voice sounded wrong, like 2 people trying to speak in unison and failing, their words overlapping and contradicting each other. The other guest had simply ceased to exist, erased so completely that even the initial registry entry had changed. Where it had said, Alex and Jordan Price, it now read only a Price. The extra name had been absorbed, consumed, deleted from reality. That afternoon, while Miss Callahan was in town, I did something stupid. I went to the cleaning closet. Rule 8. The cleaning closet stays locked. Don't ask why it smells like bleach. The door was locked, as always, but the key hung on the rack behind the desk. My hands were shaking as I turned it in the lock. The smell hit me first. Not bleach, as the rule suggested, but something organic and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. Inside, where I'd expected to find mops and cleaning supplies, I found photographs. Hundreds of them, pinned to every surface. The walls, the ceiling, the back of the door. Polaroids of guests checking in, their smiles bright and unsuspecting. And beneath each photo, written in faded ink, was a number and a date. I recognized some of them. Thomas Garrett, number 247. Patricia Owens, number 259. The Reyes couple, number 248 and number 249. They went back years, decades. The earliest ones were dated 1994. The photographs yellowed and cracked with age. I was pulling one down to look closer when I heard footsteps behind me. Find what you were looking for. Miss Callahan stood in the doorway, her shadow stretching across the floor toward me. Her smile was gone. In its place was something cold and patient and very, very old. Curiosity is natural, Eli, but it's also dangerous, especially here. She'd never used my name before. I never told her my name. It wasn't in any employment paperwork because there hadn't been any employment paperwork. The realization hit me like ice water. She'd always known. Everything about me. Everything about everyone who'd ever stopped here. The cameras are for management only, she said softly, stepping into the closet. The door swung shut behind her. Rule 13. Never review the tapes. But you haven't broken that one yet, have you? Her smile returned, sharp as broken glass. Don't. Trust me. You won't like what you see. That night, I couldn't help myself. After she left, after the sun had set and the first guests began to arrive, I went to the back office where the security system was housed. The door was unlocked. Another trap, I realized, but I was past caring. The monitors showed all 12 rooms, plus the parking lot, the office, and the stretch of desert behind the motel. I rewound the footage to the previous night. Watched the couple check into room 5. Watched them enter their room, laughing. Then I watched as the timestamp reached 1:33 a.m. On screen, their door opened. 2 figures walked out, but they weren't human anymore. They were shadows, dark and formless, moving in perfect sync. They walked toward the desert, their forms stretching and distorting, until they simply merged with the darkness and vanished. A few minutes later, one figure walked back. It had shape again, human shape, wearing Alex's clothes. Or maybe Jordan's. It was impossible to tell. The figure entered room 5 and closed the door. When it emerged at dawn to leave its luggage, it moved stiffly, mechanically, like something learning to walk for the first time. I rewound further. Watched guest after guest follow the same pattern. Check in. Walk into the desert at 2:45 a.m. Some came back. Most didn't. The ones who returned were always different, moving wrong, their shadows falling at impossible angles, even in the fluorescent light. Then I made a mistake. I rewound to my first night. Watched myself arrive, exhausted and desperate, meeting Ms. Callahan for the first time. Watched myself settle into the office, reading the rule book. And at 2:45 a.m., I watched something that made my blood turn to ice. I watched myself stand up from the desk. Watched myself walk out of the office, into the parking lot, toward the desert. My body moved like a puppet on strings, jerky and wrong. The camera followed me as I walked into the darkness, past where the parking lot lights reached, into absolute blackness. 37 minutes later, I walked back, but the person who returned wasn't quite the same as the person who'd left. I could see in the footage, something in the way he moved, the way he held his head, the way his shadow didn't match his body. The desk bell rang behind me. Twice. Sharp. Clear. It was 2:45 a.m. I didn't look up, but in the reflection of the monitor screen, I saw something standing behind me. Something tall and thin with too many joints in its arms. It leaned down, its breath cold against my neck, and whispered in my own voice. You checked in 3 weeks ago, Eli. Don't you remember? Room 1. You never really checked out. None of us do. When I finally worked up the courage to turn around, the office was empty. But on the desk, next to the guest registry, was a driver's license. My driver's license. But the photo showed someone else. Someone who looked like me, but wasn't. Their eyes too dark, their smile too wide. The name on the license was Eli Harrow. The date of birth was correct, but the issue date was March 15th, 1994. 31 years before I was born. I stopped sleeping. Not by choice. Sleep simply stopped coming. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the security footage, watched myself walk into the desert and come back wrong. Watched 30 years of guests follow the same path, their bodies moving like marionettes, their shadows growing darker and more solid until the shadows were all that remained. The Lime Motel had been built in 1994. I found the cornerstone behind a creosote bush near room 1, half buried in sand. The date was carved into the concrete. March 15th, 1994. The same date on my impossible driver's license. I went to the library in Fort Stockton, spending my days off digging through newspaper archives while my nights belonged to the motel. What I found made the desert heat feel cold. In 1993, there had been a detention facility here, a temporary holding station for migrants caught crossing the border. Unofficial, unregulated. The kind of place that existed in bureaucratic blind spots, where people could disappear and no one with the power to investigate would care. According to reports, 73 people vanished from that facility between January and March of 1994. Men, women, children, gone without a trace. The investigation went nowhere. The facility was shut down, the buildings demolished. Then in March 1994, the Line Motel opened for business in the exact same location. I copied what records I could find, stuffing them into my backpack. There was a photograph in one article, a group of officials standing in front of the detention center. In the back row, partially obscured, was a woman with silver hair pulled tight. The caption didn't name her, but I knew that face. Ms. Callahan, looking exactly the same 31 years ago. The management-only van made its nightly rounds like clockwork. At 3 a.m., it would emerge from behind the motel, collect the luggage left by the office door, and drive into the desert. I'd watched it every night, watched it disappear into the darkness, its taillights fading like dying embers. It always came back empty. Tonight, I decided to follow it. I left the office at 2:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the bell would ring, and positioned myself behind the dumpster at the edge of the property. The van appeared right on schedule, its engine purring quietly. The driver, I'd never seen them up close, loaded the 3 suitcases from tonight's guests into the back. Then the van rolled slowly toward the desert, taking the dirt road that led away from the highway into absolute nowhere. I followed on foot, staying low, using the scrub brush for cover. The van's taillights were easy to track in the darkness, 2 red eyes leading deeper into the wasteland. We traveled for maybe 20 minutes, though time felt strange out here, elastic and unreliable. The motel lights had long since disappeared behind us. Finally, the van stopped. I crouched behind a boulder, watching. The driver got out, a tall figure in coveralls and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured their face. They opened the back doors and began unloading the luggage, placing each piece carefully on the ground in a specific pattern. 3 suitcases, arranged in a triangle. Then they walked away, back to the van, and drove off. They never looked back. The van's lights disappeared over a rise, and I was alone in the desert with 3 pieces of luggage that had belonged to people who no longer existed. I waited 10 minutes to be sure the van wasn't coming back. Then I approached. The luggage sat exactly where it had been placed, untouched by the wind that was now picking up, sending sand skittering across the hardpan. I reached for the nearest suitcase, a blue roller bag with a broken wheel. The moment my fingers touched it, the desert around me changed. The darkness pulled back like curtain, and I could see dozens of suitcases, hundreds. They surrounded me in concentric circles, stretching out into the night. Some new and some so old they'd rotted to leather scraps and metal frames. In the center of it all, where the 3 fresh pieces had been placed, the sand was moving, churning like water, spiraling slowly downward into a hole that hadn't been there a moment before. The suitcases were sliding toward it, slowly at first, then faster, tumbling and bouncing as they were pulled into that hungry darkness. I stumbled backward, but my foot caught on something, a briefcase, ancient and cracked, and I fell. The sand beneath me shifted, and I felt the pull of that spiral, felt it trying to drag me down. I scrambled away, my hands digging into the sand. And that's when I heard them. Voices, rising from the hole. Dozens of them, hundreds, all speaking at once in different languages, all saying the same thing. Welcome to the Line Motel. I ran. I didn't stop running until the motel lights came back into view, my lungs burning, my legs shaking. When I finally collapsed against the office door, the sun was rising, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Miss Callahan was waiting inside. She sat at the desk, holding a cup of coffee from room 6, I realized, and smiled at me like a proud teacher whose student had finally learned an important lesson. You went further than most, she said. The last night clerk never made it past the parking lot before he understood. But you're curious. That's good. Curiosity means you'll last longer. What is this place? I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. What are you? This is the line, she said simply. The border. Not between countries, between here and there, between being and unbeing. The detention center tried to use it, tried to make people disappear cleanly, bureaucratically. But the line doesn't work that way. It doesn't erase. It transforms. It keeps. She stood, walking to the window. In the growing light, I could see the desert more clearly, see the ripples in the sand that might have been wind patterns or might have been something moving beneath the surface. 73 people vanished in 1994, she continued. 73 became part of the line. They're still here, Eli. They never left. They became the foundation, the structure, the rules. Every guest who checks and feeds them strengthens them. And in return, the line gives us purpose. The missing become the machinery. The disappeared become the doors. And you? I asked, what are you? Her smile widened, and for just a moment, her reflection in the window didn't match her body. I was the first guest, she said. March 15th, 1994. I checked in when this was still a detention center, when the line was new and hungry and still learning what it could do. I was going to be disappeared, erased from all records. Instead, I became part of the disappearing. I became management. She turned back to me, and her eyes were black from lid to lid, like oil spills. You'll understand soon enough. You're already part of it, Eli. You've been since you took the job, since you walked into the desert that first night and came back changed. The person who drove here 3 weeks ago, he checked out. The person standing in front of me now, you're what the line kept. I looked down at my hands. They looked normal, skin and bone and fingernails that needed trimming. But when I held them up to the light, my shadow fell wrong, stretching toward the desert instead of away from the sun. That night, I searched the back office more thoroughly. Behind a filing cabinet, I found a map pinned to the wall. A map of the southwestern United States, covered in red XS. Hundreds of them, each one marked with a date and a number. The earliest ones were clustered around the line Motel, but as the years progressed, they spread outward like infection, following highways and back roads, marking rest stops and motels and diners. I found one in El Paso, dated 2 months ago, one in Tucson, one in Albuquerque. The line wasn't just here. It was spreading, growing, establishing new borders in new places. And each red X represented another location where people could check in but never truly check out. On the desk, I found an old ID badge, the kind on a lanyard that you clip your shirt. The plastic was yellowed, the photo faded, but I could still make out the face. It was Miss Callahan, looking exactly the same as she did now. The name on the badge read E. Callahan, manager. The date read March 15th, 1994. E. Callahan, Eliza Callahan. But also, I realized with creeping horror, Eli Callahan. The name could be either, could be both. I pulled out my wallet, found my driver's license. Eli Harrow, it said, but when I held it up to the light, I could see other names beneath it, faint as ghosts, overwritten again and again. Eli Matthews, Eli Chong, Eli Rodriguez, Eli Harrow. How many Ellis had there been? How many night clerks? All thinking they were different people, all bearing the same first name. The voices in the walls were getting louder. I'd been hearing them for days now, whispers that I'd tried to ignore. But now I listened, really listened. You checked in, they murmured, dozens of voices layered together. You belong here now. You're part of the turnover, part of the line. The line divides. The line keeps. The line never ends. I found a phrase everywhere once I started looking, carved into the underside of the desk, etched into every single key tag. The line divides. Scratched into the bathroom mirror in room 1, my room, barely visible in the condensation after I showered. Written in the margins of the rulebook in different hands, different pens, different inks, all saying the same thing. That night, my 21st night, 3 weeks exactly since I'd started, I had a dream. Except I don't think it was a dream at all. I stood in the desert surrounded by suitcases, thousands of them, stretching to the horizon in every direction. Each one was open, empty, waiting, and I could feel them pulling at me, trying to hollow me out, trying to make me as empty as the luggage, as empty as the rooms, as empty as the desert itself. Faces emerged from the sand. The trucker, Thomas Garrett. The couple, the Reyes. Patricia Owens. All the guests I'd logged in my secret notebook. They weren't dead. They were something else. Something in between. They reached toward me with hands made of shadow and sand, their mouths moving, but no sound coming out. Then I saw myself, not a reflection, another me, standing across the spiral of luggage, wearing the same clothes, same face, same everything. Except he was smiling, and I wasn't. He raised a hand in greeting, and his shadow had substance, had weight, had hunger. "You're almost ready," he said with my voice. "Just a little longer, just a little emptier. Then you can join us. Then you can really be part of the line." I woke up screaming. The clock read 2:43 a.m. 2 minutes until the bell would ring. I was in the office at the desk, exactly where I'd been when I fell asleep. But my hands were covered in sand, and my shoes were caked with desert mud. I'd been walking again, walking while I thought I was dreaming, walking toward that spiral in the desert where the luggage disappeared and the line fed. The bell rang. Once. Twice. I kept my eyes down, but I could feel something massive moving through the office, something that barely fit through the door, something that had to fold and compress itself to navigate the human-sized space. It circled me like it had before, but this time it stopped directly behind my chair. A hand, cold, dry, wrong, touched my shoulder. Fingers that had too many joints, skin that felt like sand compressed into flesh. And then that voice, my voice, whispered directly into my ear. "Time to check out, Eli. Your replacement just checked in." I jerked my head up, breaking the rule, unable to stop myself. The office was empty, but through the window, I could see headlights turning into the parking lot. A car I didn't recognize, pulling up to the office. The clock now read 2:47 a.m. No one checks in after midnight. That was rule 2. But the car doors opened anyway, and a figure stepped out. Young, maybe mid-20s, carrying a backpack and moving with the exhausted shuffle of someone who'd been driving too long. They looked exactly how I must have looked 3 weeks ago. Desperate, broke, and grateful for any kind of refuge. I watched them approach the office door, watched them reach for the handle. Every instinct screamed at me to warn them, to tell them to get back in their car and drive anywhere else. But my hand was already moving to the guest registry, my mouth already forming the words I've been programmed to say. "Welcome to the Lime Motel," I heard myself whisper. The door swung open, but it wasn't a stranger standing there. It was me. Same face, same clothes, same everything, except his eyes were clearer than mine had been in days. And he looked at me with the confused hope of someone who doesn't yet understand what he's found. "I called about the job," he said. "The night shift position. Someone named Ms. Callahan told me to come by tonight." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Behind him, the desert had gone completely silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. The kind of silence that comes right before something terrible happens. Is this the right place?" he asked, stepping into the office. The Lime Motel. The rule book lay open on the desk. I looked down at it, and there at the bottom of the page, written in fresh ink that was still wet, was a new rule. Rule 21. The clerk always stays until replaced. My hands began to shake. I looked up at the other me, the new me, the fresh me, and I understood with perfect, horrible clarity what was about to happen. What had already happened? What would keep happening over and over as long as the line needed it to. Yeah, I finally managed. This is the right place. Miss Callahan will be here at 7 to train you. I stood up, my legs barely supporting me. I'm just finishing my last shift. He smiled with relief. Last shift? You're leaving? Something like that. I whispered. I walked past him, out into the parking lot. The air felt thick, heavy, like moving through water. My feet carried me toward the desert, toward that dirt road I'd followed the van down. I could feel the pull now, constant and undeniable, like a fishhook lodged in my chest. Behind me, I heard the new Eli settle into the desk chair. Heard him pick up the rulebook and begin to read. Heard Miss Callahan's voice, though she shouldn't arrive for hours yet, welcoming him to his new position. The desert opened before me like a mouth, and I walked into it, my shadow stretching behind me, growing darker and more solid with every step, until I couldn't tell anymore where I ended and the shadow began. I didn't make it to the spiral. Something else found me first. I've been walking for what felt like hours, following that invisible pull toward the heart of the desert, when I heard a sound that didn't belong, the mechanical grind of a door opening. Not a car door or a room door, but something heavier, older, the groan of metal that hasn't moved in years. I turned around, disoriented. The motel was nowhere in sight, but somehow I was standing in front of a door, not attached to anything, just a door frame standing alone in the sand. The door itself, painted the same sun-bleached pink as the motel rooms. There was no number on it, just a simple 0 carved into the wood. Room 0. I'd memorized every room number at the motel. 12 rooms, numbered 1 through 12. There was no room 0, but here it was impossible and waiting, and the doorknob was turning from the inside. The door swung open, revealing not the desert but a hallway. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating walls covered in that same pink paint. I could smell it now, the overwhelming scent of bleach and copper that I'd learned to associate with the cleaning closet. But stronger here, concentrated. I should have run, should have kept walking toward the spiral, toward whatever end was waiting for me there. But something about that hallway felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain, like déjà vu carved so deep it had become part of my bone marrow. I stepped through. The door slammed shut behind me. When I turned to open it again, there was no doorknob on this side, no handle, just smooth wood. I was trapped in a hallway that shouldn't exist, in a room that had no number, and the fluorescent lights were humming with a sound that was almost like words. The hallway was longer than it should have been, stretching back into darkness that the lights couldn't quite penetrate. Along both walls, stacked floor to ceiling, was luggage. Hundreds of pieces, thousands, every size and style and color, arranged with meticulous care. Some were new, the tag still attached. Others were decades old, leather cracked and fabric rotted, held together by rust and will. I walked slowly down the hallway, my footsteps echoing. Each piece of luggage had a tag attached, but not the kind you'd get in an airport. These were white tags with handwritten numbers. 247, 248, 249. Every guest I'd logged in my notebook was here, their belongings sorted and stored like evidence in a police locker. I found Patricia Owen's expensive suitcase, hashtag 259. The Reyes couple's matching bags, hashtag 248 and number 249. All the way at the far end, I found Thomas Garrett's worn duffel bag, hashtag 247. And then I found mine. It was my old backpack, the one I'd been carrying when I arrived at the motel 3 weeks ago. The one that should have been in room 1, in my room. But here it was, stacked with all the others, with a white tag tied to the strap. The number read, number 273. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside were my clothes, my wallet, my phone, everything exactly as I packed it. But there was something else too. A piece of paper, folded small, tucked into the front pocket. I pulled it out and unfolded it. It was a driver's license. My driver's license. But not the impossible one dated 1994. This was my real one, the one I'd had before I came here. Eli Harrow. Date of birth correct. Issue date correct. Everything correct. Except the photo showed someone I didn't recognize anymore. The face was younger, less tired, the eyes still bright with something that might have been hope. I touched my own face, feeling the stubble, the hollow cheeks, the skin stretched too tight over bone. When did I start looking so different? You can't take it with you. I spun around. Miss Callahan stood at the end of the hallway, though I hadn't heard her approach. She wore the same clothes she always wore, but here in this impossible space, she looked different somehow. More solid, more real. The luggage stays, she continued, walking toward me. It's all that's left after the line takes what it needs. The belongings. The proof that someone existed. We keep them here, catalog them. A museum of the disappeared. Where is here? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Room 0. The foundation. The place beneath the place. She gestured around at the stacked luggage. Every motel needs a lost and found. This is ours. I looked past her, deeper into the hallway. The darkness at the far end was moving, I realized, undulating like something alive. What's back there? The line itself. The border. The thing that was here before the detention center, before the motel, before any human set foot in this desert. It's old, Eli. Older than countries. Older than the concept of borders. It just is. And it hungers. She was close now. Close enough that I could see my reflection in her oil-black eyes. We didn't create it. We just built a structure around it. Gave it rules. Made it manageable. 3 guests a week. That's the agreement. 3 check in. 3 get processed. 3 feed the line. In exchange, it lets the rest of the world continue existing as if nothing's wrong. Processed, I repeated. The word tasted like ashes. You mean killed? No. She shook her head. Death will be kinder. They're transformed, broken down into component parts. Memory, identity, substance, shadow. The line consumes it all, reorganizes it, and what's left becomes part of the system. Some become the rules. Some become the mechanisms. Some become the next generation of clerks. My stomach turned. The other Eli, the one who just arrived. He's not a replacement. He's me. He's what I was before the line. Before the line processed you, she finished. Yes, the cycle continues. Eli checks in. Eli becomes the clerk. Eli walks into the desert. Eli gets processed. Another Eli arrives to start again. We've been through 73 of you so far. 1 for each person who vanished from the detention center. The line made that trade in 1994, and it's been collecting ever since. I felt my legs give out. I sank against the wall, surrounded by the luggage of the disappeared, and finally understood. I'm already gone, aren't I? I'm already processed. That's why my bag is here. That's why there's a new me. You're in transition, Ms. Callahan said, not unkindly. Not quite gone, not quite here. Room 0 is the in-between space, where we decide what becomes of you. She gestured toward the darkness at the end of the hall. Come, it's time you met the others. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to run, to do anything but follow her deeper into this impossible space. But my feet moved anyway, carrying me forward against my will. The rules had me now. The line had me. I was part of the system, part of the machinery, and the machinery was calling me home. The darkness resolved as we approached, not into light, but into shape. The hallway opened into a vast chamber, so large I couldn't see the walls or ceiling. And in that chamber, arranged in concentric circles like the luggage in the desert, stood people. Hundreds of them, thousands, all perfectly still, all facing inward toward the center of the chamber. I recognized some from the photographs in a cleaning closet. Guests from years past, decades past, still wearing the clothes they checked in with. Their faces frozen in expressions of confusion or fear or resignation. But they weren't quite people anymore. Their edges were blurred, indistinct, like smoke given human shape. And they were all connected, thin strands of darkness linking them together, a web of shadow and hunger that pulsed with a rhythm that might have been a heartbeat. The processed, Miss Callahan said, the ones who feed the line, the ones who have become the line. They're not dead, Eli. They're just different. They exist in the space between being and unbeing. They man the mechanisms. They enforce the rules. They keep everything running smoothly. At the center of the chamber sat a black rotary phone on a simple wooden table. Nothing else. Just the phone waiting. That's for you, she said, pointing. Your choice. Pick it up. Accept what you've become. Join the others. Or refuse, and a line will process you anyway, just more violently, less pleasantly. The phone is mercy. The phone is consent. But either way, the outcome is the same. I stared at the phone. It looked like something from the 1970s, black plastic and chrome, the kind you'd see in old movies, the kind that shouldn't still exist, let alone work. But as I watched, it began to ring, a shrill, mechanical sound that echoed through the chamber, making all the processed figures sway slightly, responding to the call like flowers turning toward the sun. What happens if I answer? I asked. You confirm the transaction. You accept your place in the system, and you'll get to choose what you become: a rule, a mechanism, a clerk, something else. You'll have that much agency, at least. And if I don't? She smiled sadly. The line takes you anyway and decides for you. Usually, those ones become the painful rules, the ones that hurt to break, the ones that draw blood. The phone kept ringing. Each ring made my teeth ache, made my bones vibrate. I could feel in my chest, in my skull, in the spaces between my thoughts. It wasn't just a sound. It was a hook, pulling me forward. I took a step toward it, then another. The processed figures turned slightly as I passed, their blurred faces trying to focus on me. Some of them reached out with shadow hands, their fingers brushing my arms, my shoulders, leaving trails of cold that sank into my skin. They were welcoming me, or warning me. I couldn't tell which. I reached the table. The phone sat there, patient and inevitable, still ringing. Up close, I could see that the rotary dial had no numbers on it. Just symbols I didn't recognize, carved into the plastic, geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly. I picked up the receiver. The ringing stopped. Silence flooded the chamber, so complete that I could hear my heart beating, could hear the blood rushing through my veins. Then a voice spoke from the phone, and it was my voice, but also every voice, all the Ellas who had come before me, and all the guests who had been processed, and all the people who had vanished from the detention center in 1994. Checkout confirmed, the voice said. Please select your function. Images flooded my mind. Options. Possibilities. I could become Rule 22, something about never opening the freezer. I could become the mechanism that made room SIXS coffee pot brew itself. I could become the next clerk, waiting in the desert for my own replacement to arrive. I could become part of the structure itself. My consciousness spread thin across the walls and doors and windows, forever aware, but forever trapped. Or I could become something else, something I'd seen in the security footage but hadn't understood. The thing that walked the halls at 2:45 a.m., too large for the space, checking on the rooms and the guests and the clerks. The thing that enforced the rules. The thing that judged. My voice shook. I don't want to choose. I don't want any of this. Irrelevant, the voice said, patient as stone. You checked in. The transaction is complete. Choose, or be chosen for. Behind me, I heard Miss Callahan speak. For what it's worth, Eli, I'm sorry. I told you on your first night, the desert keeps what it wants. We're all just trying to make the best of being kept. The phone crackled. The voice spoke again. 10 seconds. 9. 8. I closed my eyes. Thought about the new Eli sitting at the desk, reading the rule book. thinking he'd found salvation in a job offer and a room with a bed. Thought about all the guests who would check in over the coming weeks, months, years. Thought about Thomas Garrett and Patricia Owens and all the others who had trusted the Line Motel to give them shelter, only to become part of its hunger. 7, 6, 5. I thought about breaking the cycle, about refusing, about letting the Line process me violently, painfully, without consent. Maybe that would change something. Maybe that would break some essential mechanism in the system. 4, 3, 2. But I knew it wouldn't. The Line had been here longer than countries, longer than laws, longer than the concept of refusal itself. One clerk's resistance wouldn't matter. Another would come, and another, and another. 73 so far. Why not 74? 1. I choose. I started to say, but the words died in my throat. Because Miss Callahan had stepped forward and taken the phone from my hand. She looked at me with those oil-black eyes, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw something almost like compassion in them. You choose to wake up, she said softly, and pressed the receiver to my forehead. The world exploded into light and pain and the sound of the desert screaming. I felt myself being pulled apart, unmade, all my component pieces scattered like seeds on the wind. Memory, identity, substance, shadow, all of it dissolving, breaking down, being fed into the Line's hungry machinery. And then, impossibly, I was back in the office, sitting at the desk. The clock read 2:46 a.m. The bell had just finished ringing. The new Eli was standing in the doorway, looking confused and hopeful, and so terribly young. Is this the right place? He asked. The Line Motel. I looked down at my hands. They were solid, real, but in the fluorescent light, my shadow fell in 3 different directions at once, and I could feel the process figures in room 0 watching through my eyes, thinking with my thoughts, existing in the spaces between my breaths. I picked up the rule book. It felt heavier than it should have. At the bottom of the page, written in my own handwriting, was a new rule. Rule 22. Never open the freezer behind the counter. I looked up at the new Eli, smiled with teeth that didn't quite feel like mine anymore, and spoke with a voice that belonged to me and Miss Callahan and the Line itself. Welcome to the Line Motel, I said. Come in. We've been expecting you. Her name was Jordan Wells, and she arrived on a Thursday evening, just as the sun was bleeding into the horizon. I watched her car, a beat-up Civic with New Mexico plates, pull into the parking lot from my position behind the front desk. She parked in the same spot where I'd parked 5 weeks ago, though I had trouble remembering if that was true or if I'd always been here, always behind this desk, always waiting for the next replacement to arrive. Miss Callahan stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. The touch was cold, but I'd grown used to cold. Everything was cold now, except for the moments when the Line pulsed through me, hot and hungry and demanding. She's perfect, Miss Callahan murmured. Young, desperate, no family who'll come looking, no job history to track. She'll last at least a month before the transition completes. I wanted to argue, to tell her that we should let this one go, but my mouth wouldn't form the words. Since I'd answered the phone in room 0, since I'd been processed and put back together wrong, I couldn't deviate from my function. I was part of the system now, part of the machinery. When guests checked in, I logged them. When the bell rang at 2:45, I kept my eyes down. When replacements arrived, I trained them. That was my role, the thing I had chosen or the thing that had chosen me. I couldn't remember the difference anymore. Jordan pushed through the office door, and I could smell her exhaustion like a physical thing. Sweat and cheap coffee and the particular despair that comes from driving too long with too little sleep and even less hope. Her eyes found mine, and I saw myself reflected there, saw how I must look to her, older than I should be, tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, but still human enough to seem trustworthy. She said, her voice rough. I called earlier about the night clerk position. Someone named Callahan told me to come by tonight. Miss Callahan stepped forward, her smile bright and practiced. Jordan, welcome. We've been expecting you. This is Eli. He's our current night clerk. He'll be training you tonight before he moves on to other opportunities. Jordan's face flooded with relief. So I got the job? Just like that. Just like that. Miss Callahan confirmed. We have a policy of hiring based on intuition rather than resumes. You sound like exactly what we needed. Now, I'll let Eli show you the ropes. I have some business to attend to in town, but I'll be back at 7 a.m. to check on things. She squeezed my shoulder once, a gesture that looked maternal but felt like a brand burning into my skin. Then she left, and it was just Jordan and me in the office. And the shadows in the corners, of course, and the processed figures watching through the walls. And the line itself, patient and eternal, waiting. This place is a little weird. Huh? Jordan said, glancing around. I mean, no offense, but it's pretty isolated. Do you get many guests? 3 a week, I heard myself say. My voice sounded normal, but underneath it, I could hear harmonics. Other voices speaking in unison, the process figures using me as their mouthpiece. Like clockwork. Tonight, you'll see how we handle check-ins. I handed her the rule book, the same spiral-bound notebook with rust-colored stains. She took it gingerly, flipping through the pages with increasing confusion. These rules are unusual, she said carefully. Never let anyone check in after midnight. Always refill room, SXS coffee pod, even if no one's there. What's that about? You'll understand once you see it in action, I told her. The Lime Motel has specific requirements. Follow the rules, and everything runs smoothly. Break them. I trailed off, thinking about the painful rules, the ones that drew blood. Don't break them. She nodded slowly, clearly unsure but too desperate to question further. I recognized that look. I'd warned myself not so long ago, or maybe it had been years. Time worked strangely now that I was part of the line. Sometimes the night shift felt like it lasted for minutes. Sometimes it stretched for weeks. So, how long have you worked here? Jordan asked, settling into the chair next to mine. I opened my mouth to say 5 weeks, but what came out was long enough. She laughed nervously. That's cryptic. You okay, man? You seem kind of out of it. I wanted to scream at her. Wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her. Tell her to get back in her car and drive anywhere else. Wanted to warn her about Room 0 and the spiral in the desert and the black rotary phone that would eventually ring with her voice on the other end. But I couldn't. The line wouldn't let me. My mouth opened, and Ms. Callahan's words came out. Just tired. Long shift. You'll get used to the night schedule. At 9:47 p.m., our first guest arrived. A businessman in his 50s, driving a rental car, looking exhausted and grateful to see the vacancy sign. I handled the check-in while Jordan watched, showing her how to log the guest information, how to select the right key, how to speak the greeting exactly right. Welcome to the Lime Motel, I said, and the words tasted like copper. The businessman took his key, room 4, number 274, and disappeared into the night. Jordan looked at me expectantly. Now what? She asked. Now we wait, I said. 2 more will come. They always do. 3 guests per week. That's the quota. Quota. She frowned. That's a weird way to put it. It's not like we can control how many people show up. Well, we could. The line could. I could feel it now. The way I'd felt the process figures in Room 0. A vast intelligence spreading across the desert, reaching out along the highways, whispering to tired drivers and desperate travelers, promising them rest and shelter, calling them in. At 10:23, a young couple arrived. At 11:54, a solo traveler in a pickup truck. Jordan helped with the second check-in, and I watched her write the guests' names in the registry with handwriting that would fade by morning. She didn't notice the number tags under the keys. Didn't realize she was assigning people to their processing orders. Number 275. Number 276. At 2:45 a.m., the bell rang. Jordan jumped at the sound. What was that? Rule 10, I said, keeping my eyes locked on the desk. When the bell rings at 2:45, don't look up. But why? Don't look up. My voice came out harsh, layered with harmonics that made the light bulbs flicker. Jordan went pale and snapped her eyes down to the desk. Smart girl. She'd learn fast, or she wouldn't learn at all. I could feel it in the room with us now. The thing that I had almost become, the thing that enforced the rules and judged the breaking of them. It moved through the office, too large for the space, folding itself into impossible configurations to navigate between the desk and the filing cabinets. Its breath was cold on the back of my neck, and when it passed Jordan, she shuddered violently but kept her eyes down. The thing paused behind her chair. I felt it considering her, tasting her potential, measuring her capacity to serve the line. Then it moved on, satisfied. She would do. She would last long enough. When it left, the air conditioner coughed back to life, and Jordan let out a sob of relief. What the hell was that? She whispered. Management, I said, which was true, in a way. Everything was management now. The line managed itself through all of us, the process, the transitioning, the ones waiting to be replaced. You'll get used to it. I don't think I want to get used to it. You will, I assured her, or you won't be here long enough for it to matter. At dawn, I walked the property with Jordan, showing her how to say goodbye to each room, even when they appeared empty. At room 4, the businessman's rental car was gone, but his briefcase sat by the office door. At room 7, the couple had vanished, leaving matching luggage. At room 11, the pickup truck remained, but the driver had left his duffel bag and his boots and nothing else. Jordan stared at the abandoned belongings. Where did they go? Did they just leave their stuff? They checked out, I said. The words came automatically now, smooth as a recorded message. The desert keeps what it wants. The management-only van appeared as we stood there, driven by a figure in coveralls that might have been human once. It loaded the luggage without acknowledging us and drove toward the desert, toward the spiral, toward room 0 where the belongings would be cataloged and stored and forgotten. Jordan watched it go, her face pale in the growing light. This isn't normal, she said quietly. This whole place. Something's really wrong here. You'll understand soon, I told her. A few more nights, and it'll all make sense. Ms. Callahan returned at 7 a.m., bringing coffee and breakfast tacos and her too bright smile. She chatted with Jordan about the schedule, about the pay, about the room she'd be staying in. Room 1, my old room. I'd been moved to the back office, to a cot behind the filing cabinets, because I didn't need a real room anymore. I barely needed to sleep. The process didn't sleep so much as wait, existing in a state of low-power standby until the line needed them again. Eli, you can head out, Ms. Callahan said, dismissing me with a wave. Take the day. Rest. You've earned it. I nodded and walked toward the back office, but I didn't rest. Instead, I found myself standing in front of the cleaning closet, the key heavy in my hand. Rule 8, the cleaning closet stays locked. Don't ask why it smells like bleach. I open it anyway. I could break rules now, as long as they didn't interfere with my function. The photographs were still there, hundreds of them, covering every surface. But there are new ones now, recent ones. Thomas Garrett, Patricia Owens, the Reyes couple, all the guests from my time as clerk, their faces frozen in that moment before they understood. And at the very bottom, pinned to the back of the door where I'd somehow missed it before, was a photograph of me. Not Eli Harroway, the person I'd been before the line, before the processing, before I became part of the machinery. I was smiling in the photo, standing next to my truck, the sun bright in my eyes. I look happy. I look whole. Written on the back in Ms. Callahan's neat handwriting. Number 273, transition successfully. Function, trainer. Duration, indefinite. I touched the photograph, and for just a moment, I remembered what it felt like to be human, to be afraid and desperate and hoping for rescue, to believe that a job offer could be salvation instead of damnation. Then a moment passed, and I was just Eli again, part of the system, part of the line. That night, Jordan worked her first solo shift. I supervised from the back office, watching her through the security cameras as she checked in 3 new guests. She was getting better at the routine, moving with more confidence, even if her hands still shook when she handed out the keys. At 2:45 a.m., when the bell rang, she kept her eyes down without hesitation. Smart girl, fast learner. She'd make it to the processing stage, maybe even choose her own function like I thought I had. At 3 a.m., I watched the management-only van make its rounds. The driver looked up at the camera and waved. I waved back, even though I knew he couldn't see me. But maybe he could. Maybe all of us process could see each other, connected through the line, part of one vast organism pretending to be many separate things. Over the following weeks, I watched Jordan slowly change. Her movements became more automatic. Her smile grew fixed. Her shadow started falling wrong in the fluorescent light. She stopped asking questions about the guests who disappeared, stopped commenting on the strange rules, stopped trying to make sense of things that couldn't be made sense of. She was transitioning, just like I had, just like all the Ellis before me. On her 21st night, 3 weeks exactly since she'd started, she came to find me in the back office. Her eyes had that glazed look I recognized from my own reflection. I had a dream, she said quietly, about a room with no number, about luggage stacked to the ceiling, about a phone that rang with my voice. Room 0, I confirmed. It's waiting for you. I don't want to go. You'll go anyway, I said, not unkindly. The line doesn't give us choices. It just makes us think we have them. She nodded slowly, accepting this truth the way I'd accepted it. Then she asked, "What did you choose when you answered the phone?" I thought about it, trying to remember through the layers of processing and reprogramming. I chose to be a trainer, I said, to help the next person understand, to make the transition easier. Did it help? Make it easier. I looked at her, really looked at her, with whatever remained of my human perception. She was so young, so tired, so ready to give up and let the line take her. No, I admitted, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is just a witness, to remember, to know that someone saw us as we were before we became this. She smiled sadly. That's a really depressing point. Yeah, I agreed. It is. That night, Jordan walked into the desert. I watched her go from the office window, watched her shadow stretch and darken and split into multiples, watched the door to room 0 appear in the sand and swallow her whole. An hour later, she came back, or something that looked like her came back. It wore her clothes and her face, but it moved with that slight wrongness that I recognized from my own movements. It settled behind the desk and opened a rule book, and I could see new ink appearing on the pages, a new rule writing itself. Rule 23. The coffee in room 6 must be drunk before sunrise, even if you're the only one awake. I poured myself a cup from room SXS eternally brewing pot and drank it while watching the security feeds. The coffee tasted like regret and resignation and all the choices we pretend to make when we're really just following the script the line has written for us. At 2:45 a.m., the bell rang. Jordan kept her eyes down. So did I. We sat together in the office, 2 processed beings pretending to be clerks, and waited for morning to come. When Ms. Callahan arrived at 7, she had someone with her, a young man, maybe 25, with a backpack and hopeful eyes and a desperation that I could smell from across the parking lot. "Eli Jordan," Ms. Callahan said cheerfully. "This is Alexis Chun. He'll be joining our team as the new night clerk. Jordan, why don't you show him the ropes? You know how it's done." Jordan stood, her movements smooth and automatic. She took the rulebook from the desk and handed it to Alexis with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to the Line Motel," she said, and the words carried harmonics that made the light bulbs flicker. "Let me show you around." I watched them leave, Jordan leading Alexis toward room 1 while explaining the rules, and I felt something that might have been sadness if I could still feel things properly. Another one caught, another one processed, another one added to the machinery. Ms. Callahan touched my shoulder. "You're free to go," she said. "Your function as trainer is complete. You can choose your next role." "What if I don't want to choose?" "Then the line chooses for you," she said, like we'd had this conversation before. Maybe we had. Time was strange when you were processed. But you know what? I think you'd make an excellent addition to enforcement. The thing that walks the halls at 2:45. The thing that judges. We could use another one. I thought about it. Thought about becoming that massive presence that had to fold itself to fit through doors, that moved through the motel, enforcing the rules, maintaining the system. It would be different from being a trainer. Less human. Less pretending. "Okay," I said, which was the only answer I could ever give. That night, I didn't show up for my shift. Instead, I stood in the desert at 2:45 a.m., feeling myself stretch and expand, my edges blurring as the line reshaped me into something new. My bones lengthened and multiplied. My shadow deepened until it had more substance than my body. My voice fractured into harmonics that could shatter glass or freeze blood, or simply enforce the rules that kept everything running. I walked back to the motel, but walking wasn't the right word anymore. I moved through space like water moving through cracks, finding paths that shouldn't exist, folding myself through dimensions that humans couldn't perceive. When I reached the office, I had to compress myself down to fit through the door, had to remember how to be small enough for human spaces. Jordan sat at the desk with Alexis beside her, showing him how to log guests. She looked up as I entered, or tried to enter, and her processed eyes widened slightly. She could see me now, really see me, the way only the process could see each other. "Rule 10, she whispered to Alexis. "Don't look up." Alexis obeyed, his eyes locked on the desk, his breathing shallow with fear. Good. Fear was useful. Fear kept people following the rules. I circled the desk slowly, testing this new form, feeling how it moved and what it could do. I could taste Alexis's potential, could see the threads of possibility spiraling out from him into the future. He would last 26 days. He would choose to become part of the foundation, one of the process figures standing in room 0, holding up the structure through sheer accumulated presence. He would last longer than most. Jordan was different. She would only make it another 8 days before her processing completed fully. Then she'd become a mechanism, the thing that made the ice machine run when the rooms were full, maybe, or the presence that brewed coffee in room 6. Something small but essential. And me? I was enforcement now. I was the consequence of broken rules. I was the thing that made sure the system kept running, that the quota was met, that the line stayed fed. I leaned down close to Alexis, close enough that my cold breath made frost form on his skin. He was shaking, but keeping his eyes down, following the rules. That would change eventually. They all broke rules eventually. And when they did, I would be there. I left the office and began my rounds. Room 4 first, where tonight's guest was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I could see the moment he sensed me outside his door, the sudden tension in his body, the spike of adrenaline. But he didn't get up to investigate. Some part of him knew that whatever was in the hallway wasn't something he wanted to see. Room 7 next. The couple inside were arguing in harsh whispers about whether to leave, whether this place was worth the $40 they'd saved compared to the chain hotel in town. They wouldn't leave. The line wouldn't let them. By morning, they convinced themselves the weird feelings were just exhaustion, just paranoia, just nothing. Room 11. Empty, but the shower was running. I could see the shadow shape using it. One of the processed who hadn't fully transitioned yet, still clinging to human routines, even though they no longer had a body that needed washing. I moved on. They weren't breaking any rules. At 3 a.m., the management only van appeared. The driver got out, and I recognized him now with my expanded perception. He'd been clerk number 47 back in 2009. He'd chosen to become a courier, endlessly driving the luggage to the spiral, endlessly feeding the line's hunger. He nodded to me as he loaded tonight's bags, a gesture of recognition between processed beings. I nodded back, or did whatever my new form did that approximated a nod. The weeks blurred together after that. I enforced. Jordan transitioned fully and became the mechanism in the ice machine. Her consciousness spread thin across metal and electricity, humming contentedly with her new purpose. Alexis lasted exactly 26 days, just as I'd foreseen, and chose his place among the foundation figures in room 0. New clerks came. Some lasted weeks. Some lasted only days. One lasted 3 months, fighting the transition every step of the way, until the line finally forced the issue and processed him violently. He became one of the painful rules. Rule 24. Never speak the names of previous guests aloud. Doing so made you taste copper for hours and left your tongue numb. Miss Callahan remained constant, unchanged, eternal. Sometimes I wondered if she was the line itself, given human form, or if the line was her, spread out across the desert, and the motel was just the smallest visible part of a hunger that stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. I stopped counting the clerks after a while. Stopped counting the guests. The numbers didn't matter. The names didn't matter. There was only the system, the machinery, the endless cycle of checking in and processing and feeding the line's appetite. One night, or maybe 1 year, time having lost all meaning, a clerk arrived who was different. Her name was River Song, and she had questions that the others hadn't thought to ask. Why 3? She asked Jordan, who was training her. Jordan had been pulled back from the ice machine temporarily, given a semi-physical form again to help with training. Why 3 guests per week specifically? Jordan recited the answer she'd been programmed to give. That's the quota. That's what the line requires. But why? What's the significance of 3? Jordan faltered. I could sense her confusion from where I waited in the walls. The processed weren't supposed to question the system. We were supposed to maintain it, not analyze it. It doesn't matter why, Jordan finally said. It just is. But River wouldn't let it go. Over her first week, she filled a notebook with observations and questions, just like I once had. Unlike me, she didn't hide it from Ms. Callahan. She showed it to her, demanded answers. Ms. Callahan read through the notebook with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Uncertainty. The line has always required 3, she said carefully. Since 1994. Since the beginning. That's just how it works. But you built this place around it, River pressed. You created the system, which means you understand how it works. So explain it to me. I was watching through the security cameras. My consciousness split across multiple feeds. I saw Ms. Callahan's face do something strange, something almost like doubt. 73 people vanished from the detention center. Ms. Callahan said slowly. 73 absorbed into the line. 3 per week for. She paused, calculating. That's only about 6 months, but it's been 31 years. That means we've processed over 4,800 people, far more than the original 73. The office went very quiet. River stared at her. Jordan, hovering in the doorway, flickered like a bad signal. So what happens? River asked. When you've processed enough? When the line is fed enough? Does it end? Or does it just keep growing? Miss Callahan didn't answer. For the first time in 3 decades, she didn't have an answer. That night, I felt something change in the line. A ripple of uncertainty, of instability. River's questions had done something that violence and resistance never could. They'd introduced doubt into a system that ran on inevitability. At 2:45 a.m., the bell rang, but it sounded different, discordant, wrong. I manifested in the office as I always did, but River looked up, broke Rule 10, looked directly at me, and she didn't scream, didn't run, just stared at my impossible form with analytical eyes and said, "You're Eli, clerk number 73, the last one before the count started over. You chose enforcement because you thought it was better than the alternatives. But you're not happy. None of you are. You're all trapped. I should have punished her for breaking the rule. Should have made her tase copper. Should have frozen her blood. Should have done something to reinforce the system. But her words had weight, had truth, and the line hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, River walked past me, out of the office toward the desert, not being pulled or called or processed, walking deliberately, with purpose, toward room 0. I followed. So did Jordan. So did Miss Callahan. We all followed this clerk who was only 3 days in her training, following her into the desert where the door stood waiting. She opened it without ceremony and walked into the hallway of luggage. We processed beings followed, our forms shifting as we passed through the doorway, becoming more solid in this space between spaces. River walked all the way to the end, to the vast chamber where the process stood in their circles. She looked at them, thousands of shadow figures, all connected, all humming with the line's rhythm. Then she walked to the center, to the black rotary phone. "Don't," Miss Callahan said. "If you answer without being called, without being processed first, it could collapse the entire system." "Good," River said, and picked up the receiver. The line screamed. I felt it through every part of my distributed consciousness, through every processed being, through every mechanism and rule and enforcer. The scream wasn't sound. It was sensation, pure and overwhelming. The feeling of something ancient and hungry suddenly being forced to acknowledge that it might not be inevitable after all. River spoke into the phone. "I don't accept the transaction. I don't consent to processing. And I speak for every person who checked in without knowing what they were checking into. Every guest who thought they were just getting a room for the night. Every clerk who thought they were just taking a job. The contract is void." The processed figures began to flicker. Their connections weakened. Some of them started to solidify, to remember what it was like to have bodies, to have names, to have choices. Ms. Callahan lunged forward, trying to take the phone, but Jordan stopped her. Or the thing that had been Jordan stopped her. The ice machine mechanism refusing to let its former trainer interfere. "Let her finish," Jordan said, and her voice carried harmonics I'd never heard before. "Hope. Maybe, or something close to it." River continued. "I'm not saying the line should die. I'm not saying the border should close. But I'm saying the cost is too high. 3 people per week for 31 years. That's not a system. That's a slaughter. So here's my counteroffer. 1 person per month. And they have to volunteer. They have to know what they're agreeing to. They have to choose." The line went silent. The processed figures stopped flickering. Everything held its breath. If things like us could breathe, waiting for the response. The phone in River's hand grew hot, then cold, then hot again. When she finally hung up, her hand was burned, the skin red and blistered. But she was smiling. "It agreed," she whispered. The line agreed to new terms. I felt it immediately. The iron grip of inevitability loosening. The programming that had controlled my thoughts and actions for months, years, decades, beginning to dissolve. I was still processed, still part of the line, but now I had something I hadn't had since answering that phone. Choice. Jordan solidified fully, her body reforming from the ice machine mechanism. She gasped, touching her face, her arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "I can feel again," she sobbed. "I can feel." Throughout room 0, the process figures began to wake up. Some chose to stay. The line still needed maintenance, still needed mechanisms and enforcers. And some of us have been part of it for so long that we didn't know how to be anything else. But others chose to leave, their forms dissolving not into the line, but into simple, final death. Release at last. Ms. Callahan collapsed to her knees. Without the line's absolute control, she was just a woman again. An old woman who had made a terrible bargain 31 years ago and had been trapped by it ever since. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small and very human. River helped her stand. "Now we rebuild. 1 volunteer per month means we need to advertise honestly. Tell people what the line is, what it does, what becoming part of it means. There are people out there who want to transcend, who want to become something other than human. Let them choose it." Over the following weeks, everything changed. The motel closed temporarily while we reorganized. The processed who wanted release got it. Their consciousness finally allowed to disperse. Their long service ended. About 200 of us chose to stay, including me. I've been part of the line too long to imagine being anything else. Jordan left. She hugged me goodbye, her arms solid and warm, and whispered, "Thank you for trying to make it easier. It didn't work, but you tried." Miss Callahan stayed too, but she was different now. Softer, more uncertain, more human. She started going by her first name, Eliza, and began the work of setting up proper documentation, proper contracts, proper informed consent for the volunteers who would feed the line going forward. River became the new manager. She never took a shift as clerk, never walked the path toward processing. Instead, she maintained a boundary between the line and humanity, making sure the new system worked, making sure the volunteers understood exactly what they were agreeing to. The first volunteer arrived on a cold November night, 3 months after River had renegotiated the contract. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was dying of cancer. The doctors had given him weeks. He found our advertisement online. We've been honest about everything, about transcendence and transformation, and the loss of individual identity in service to something vast and strange. "Will it hurt?" he asked River. "Yes," she said. "Dying always hurts. But this way you don't end. You become part of something that will outlast continents." He signed the papers, read the rules, understood what checking into room 1 would mean. At 2:45 a.m., I manifested in his room, but this time I spoke. "Marcus Webb, you volunteered for processing. You understand the terms. Do you consent?" "I consent," he said clearly. "Then welcome to the line," I said, and guided him into the desert, to room 0, to the black rotary phone that would transform him from dying man into eternal mechanism. He chose to become part of the foundation, standing in the circle with the others, holding up the structure. When the processing completed, I felt him settle into place, his consciousness spreading out to touch all of us who comprised the line. He was at peace. He had chosen this. That made all the difference. Now, I stand in the office of the Line Motel, looking at the staff photo on the wall. There's River, smiling. There's Eliza Callahan, looking older but lighter. There's Jordan's photo, though she's long gone, living somewhere in Oregon and sending us postcards occasionally. And there's me, Eli, clerk number 73, enforcement, part of the machinery. Still here, still serving, still waiting. But the difference is that now, when someone checks in, I can tell them the truth, can give them the choice that none of us had before River changed everything. Every month, 1 volunteer checks in. Every month, they sign the papers and read the rules and walk into room 0. Every month, the line feeds, but gently now, sustainably, with consent. And me? I'm still here, part of the turnover, part of the system, part of the eternal machinery of the line. But unlike before, I chose to stay. And that makes all the difference. The desert wind blows hot and constant outside. The neon sign flickers. The Line Motel, steady now, no longer stuttering into lies. 3 cars pull into the parking lot. their headlights cutting through the dust. Tourists, probably. People looking for a clean room and a decent breakfast. People who will check in, sleep, and check out again like normal guests at a normal motel. Because that's what we are now, mostly. Normal. Except for one night each month, when a volunteer arrives, and we remember what we really are, a border between being and unbeing, a line between here and there, a place where the desperate and the dying can choose to become something other than human. I watch the tourists approach, and I smile with a mouth that almost feels like mine again. Welcome to the Line Motel, I say, and this time, the words are true. The end.